So again, if you could open your Bibles to Luke chapter 9, verses 10 to 17 is what we will be looking at this afternoon. And as we do, I want to ask you a question. And it's this: do you ever look at situations, those situations that you're facing in life, and become afraid? Maybe find those times where you're full of doubt. Maybe you've lost a family member. They've walked away from the Lord, and you wonder, are they ever going to be saved? Maybe there's a physical need in your life, and you wonder if it'll be all right, or if this time it's going to lead to something worse. Have you ever felt like you've been in an impossible situation? The facts are stacked against you, and you know the answer. You know it. The answer being, there's no way out. There's no practical solution to this problem. You know, some of us here in this room may be in an impossible situation right now, and you might be asking why in the world, God, do you allow us to be in impossible circumstances, these circumstances that appear in my life that I don't have any control over? Why, God? Why do you do that? Why does God allow these things to happen? I mean, we want to solve the issue, I'm sure. We want to solve the problem, to find our way through the hurt, the pain, the confusion. Nobody chooses the pain and the confusion on purpose. And yet so often, why do we find ourselves there? And we've all been there, there being the realization that our ability to find a solution is lacking. And so we feel so inadequate. And here's the thing. That's actually the correct assumption. We are inadequate. And that's why we all feel that way so often. And yet, much too often, I think we try to look for the solution to the problem based on our own abilities. Now, in this passage that Michael read for us from Luke 9 this afternoon, we saw that this is exactly what the disciples did. They looked at a problem and they approached it with their own abilities, as though they could solve the problem, or even give advice to Jesus about the problem. By the way, just lay it out here for you right now. Jesus does not need your advice. But thankfully, they learned that their perspectives and their solutions, they figured this out as Jesus was guiding them along. They figured out that their perspectives and their solutions were painfully limited. Through them coming to Jesus, he taught them, and us, by the way, some valuable lessons even here today that if we all learn to embrace, will change not just our perspective today, but will alter the way that we see Jesus himself. Alter the way we understand God's goodness, God's grace, God's generosity, and God's concern for his people. How do we learn all of this? Well, first of all, in verses 10 to 11, we see Jesus' concern for the crowd. Look at verse 10. When the apostles returned, they reported to Jesus all that they had done. He took them along and withdrew privately to a town called Bethsaida. When the crowds found out, they followed him. He welcomed them, spoke to them about the kingdom of God, and healed those who needed healing. Okay, so now, after the apostles had returned from their first preaching tour, they all gave Jesus a report. They were excited about all the things that had happened, and they wanted to be the first in line, I'm sure, to share what was going on. We know kind of the MO of the disciples. They would have probably done that, but they give them a report, and then Jesus then takes them to the vicinity of Bethsaida on the northeast side of the Sea of Galilee. By the way, Bethsaida is the hometown of Peter, Andrew, and Philip. And so you can imagine that they're thinking, oh, good, we've done a lot of work. We're finally going to get some R&R. We're going to get maybe mom's home cooking. Oh, that'll be great because we're going to our hometown. We're going to get a bit of R&R in their dad's man cave. literal cave, maybe watch some Indy 500 chariot racing, whatever it is that they were going to do. They're looking forward to this time. But the trip across the lake, by the way, was the only vacation that they got, because the people saw them going. They saw them get in the boat. They saw them going across the water and ran from all of the cities, and they all arrived ahead of them. And so all of a sudden the disciples show up, and when they see this crowd of needy people standing on the shore, they must have thought, heavens to Betsy, can we just turn the boat around? You can just imagine what was going through their minds. But you know what? Jesus didn't do that. Jesus cared for these people, and so provided for them the best of what he could offer. And the best that he could offer to these people was himself. He could have turned the boat around, and he could have landed somewhere else in order to get some rest and to give his boys a retreat. But he didn't. Instead, he came straight to them. No stopping. He wanted to meet their immediate needs, and he did it before considering his own need. That's our Jesus. Isn't that good? I mean, here they were, these people, they were blind, there was deaf, they were lame, there were diseased and dying people there. And by the end of the day, they would also have a need of physical food. But whether anyone recognized it or not, each person's greatest need wasn't physical that day. It was spiritual. Jesus could heal their bodies and he could fill their stomachs, but that was only a stopgap measure, because guess what? They're all going to get sick, and they're all going to die later on anyways. So Jesus, concerned more for their eternal destinies, not only healed their physical ailments, but he also taught them about the kingdom of God. In other words, telling them how they could become sons and daughters of the Most High God in his kingdom and never go hungry or thirsty again, never get sick again, and never die again. Just like the crowd, the disciples were focused on the physical, which is why we see them tell Jesus to send the people away to get some food. Luke 9:12 says this, late in the day, the 12 approached and said to him, send the crowd away so that they can go into the surrounding villages and countryside to find food and lodging, because we are in a deserted place here. You give them something to eat, he said. The disciples knew the people needed to reach surrounding villages soon. I mean, it's getting late in the day. They got to go buy some food, let alone find some lodging. They're in a deserted location where there's no food to be found. I mean, imagine living in a world where there's no Tim's, no Boston Pizza. There's not even a 7-Eleven. People won't be able to find any food to eat unless they get there ASAP. And so I can imagine they're looking at Jesus. They come to him. They're his boys. And so they come up to him. You preach long enough, Jesus. Get to the benediction. Let these poor folks get go find some food. But that's when Jesus then turns to them and he says something astounding. He says, no, you give them something to eat. So can you imagine their response or their reaction? Like, say again? Really? I mean, do you realize that there are 5,000 men? And then on top of that, Jesus, there's men, or there's women, and there's children included in that number? Disciples are trying to solve this impossible situation on their own. They're summing it up, and then their math didn't really work according to God's math, and they failed. Here they are, by the way, in the presence of the creator of the universe, yet didn't believe that he could handle the situation. And you know, we could point our fingers at the disciples, but I do wonder about us. You and I think, have at times acted in the same way, if we're honest. Who here is not worried over problems? You know, where we're filled with doubt concerning Jesus' ability to solve them. You know, instead of coming to Jesus with a heart that says, Lord, I believe in you. I know this is a big problem for me, but I know completely, with no doubt, that this is not a problem for you. And so we instead carry our problems around and we allow them to just drain the spiritual life right out of us. How many of you are ever tired of doing that? I, for one, am. Or maybe we do bring them to Jesus and we make a show of leaving them there at the cross, at his feet. But then how many times do we go back there and we pick them right up and we begin carrying them around again because we don't really trust him? The facts are that regardless of the fears you may have today, know that our fears, your fears, are small when they're placed next to Jesus. If he can create the universe out of nothing, think about this, which he did out of nothing. He created this cosmos. Surely he can meet your need. If he can keep Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego safe from the fiery furnace, certainly he could meet your need. If he can feed 3 million Jews in the desert for 40 years, he can take care of you. If he can defeat sin, death, hell, the grave, and Satan using an old rugged cross and an empty tomb, guess what, church? He can take care of you. Now, in this event, we see a reminder of God's concern for his people in the history of the nation of Israel. These 5,000 people plus the others, there's a lot more than that. They were as lost as their ancestors who wandered in the desert for 40 years during the Exodus when Moses led the children of Israel to the promised land, where God provided manna. If you remember the story, provided manna to feed them. But now here in this story, we see someone greater than Moses had come. Greater than Moses because he not only provided physical food, but he provided spiritual food. Moses could never do that. He provided the spiritual food as the bread of life. He was providing them more than manna. He was providing them himself, and had proved again and again that he was more than enough to provide for their needs. Yet, still, the disciples seem to have forgotten his previous provision. All of those miracles that he had performed before. They've been there. They've been witness to it. They've been part of it. They should have known that he cared for them after all the miracles they'd witnessed already. It seems that they had forgotten how he had taken care of them in the past. So quickly we forget, don't we? Like when you face a crisis in your life, do you remember how God helped you in the past? In times of trial and suffering, there tends to be a voice that doesn't struggle against our faithlessness, but calls into question the faithfulness of God. Will he come through? Will he do what he's promised? Will he provide? Will he heal? Will he save? Will he strengthen? Will he hold me fast? Will he? I mean, how in the world then shall we fight against that fear? Might I suggest a trip through Narnia? One of the deep delights of spending time in Narnia is the sights that we get of Aslan. I read the Chronicles of Narnia probably, if not 24 times, probably 36 times as a kid, up until the age of 12 for sure. But one of the delights, I said, is the sights we get of Aslan. And one of those sights stands out to me so clearly. It's as Lucy utters the spell to make hidden things visible from the magician's book. Some of you may remember that story. And Aslan appears to her once again. And Lucy, she's taken aback by his claim that she'd a part to play in the making him visible. And it did, said Aslan. Do you think I wouldn't obey my own rules? That's God. God obeys his own rules, church. Take that to the bank. He always keeps his word. He always remains faithful, and he's more than able to take care of you and me. Jesus is concerned about you more than you could ever know. So whatever you fear today, whatever you're going to fear tomorrow, whatever you feared yesterday, bring it to him. Leave it in his hand. We also see here in this passage Jesus' generosity. Starting in verse 13, we have no more than 5 loaves and 2 fish, they said, unless we go and buy food for all these people. For about 5,000 men were there. Then he told his disciples, have them sit down in groups of about 50 each. They did what he said and had them all sit down. In John's account of the story, by the way, all four Gospels share this story. There's only two events in all of the Gospels that are shared in all of them. And that is Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, and also this story. This story is important then. So in John's account of the story, he tells us that they were able to only find 5 barley loaves, along with 2 fish from a small boy's lunch. Barley loaves, by the way, weren't big, long loaves of bread. It wasn't like going to Subway where you can get a 12-inch or something like that. It was more along the size of about a small tortilla. It's flat, actually. And the fish wasn't a trophy bass or a 700-pound yellowfish tuna. They were the salted fish, about the size of a sardine, and that's what the people in the area would have eaten. In other words, it wasn't a lot, wasn't fancy at all, wouldn't go far. So when they come back with that small amount, the disciples express doubt about this provision, and so they make a suggestion. They're going to help Jesus out with this problem, and they say, Jesus, maybe we should go and buy some food. This entire incident, though, underscores the utter inadequacy of the disciples to meet this overwhelming need. Jesus says, go feed them. They come back. They can't. Just a little bit of food. Nothing they could do. These fellows had sized up the crowd and the provisions and decided there just wasn't enough to go around. And you know what? From a human perspective, they're right. Think about it now. If there were just an average of 2 kids for each man and then another 2,500 to 5,000 women, and then add to that a few hundred singles in the mix, we're talking about providing food for a crowd of nearly 20,000 people, about twice the population of Truro. That's enough people to fill the Scotia Centre to capacity, not once, but twice. It's a lot of people. These men considered their problem and they summed it up as insurmountable. It didn't matter that they'd already seen Jesus turn water into wine, heal lepers, cast out legions of demons, calm violent storms, heal people with incurable diseases, and for that matter, even raising the dead. It didn't matter that he'd proven himself to them more times than they could probably now, by this point, remember. All that mattered at the moment was the obstacle they saw before their eyes. I think their real problem, though, was that they're focusing on the problem rather than on God. Do we do that? The facts are that God has never failed us. He never failed them, and he never will, because nothing is impossible or too big for him to handle. In the hands of Jesus, the little I give is always more than enough. Look at verse 16. Then he took the 5 loaves, the 2 fish, looking up to heaven, he blessed and broke them. He kept giving them to the disciples to set before the crowd. Everyone ate and was filled. They picked up 12 baskets of leftover pieces. Jesus takes the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, lifts his face toward heaven, and he blesses the food. And then notice the words broke and giving. These words indicate that he kept on breaking and he kept on giving. Jesus took those little loaves of tiny sardines and he multiplies them in his hands. He just kept on breaking them and giving them to his disciples, and the loaves and the fish, they just kept on multiplying. Jesus exercised his creative power to accomplish this miracle, and he did so generously. He didn't skimp it. He did it generously, breaking and giving until every person in the crowd had been filled up and more. Now, this is a potlucks church, isn't it? People had all been filled up. And it wasn't even done then. And then finally, when the disciples had gathered up the leftovers, there were 12 baskets full, one for every single disciple. This speaks to us of the fact that God is not only a generous provider, but he also has unlimited resources, even while using the most ordinary of things. I mean, think of it, barley loaves and some sardines. I mean, that's what he does with you and me too. When we offer our lives sacrificially, relinquishing our hold on whatever God has given us in terms of time, of money, of talents, or whatever else, God will use these ordinary things to create extraordinary things. And when he does so generously. All I'm trying to get you to see today is that Jesus is cosmically generous and is more than enough. And don't think he can't do much with the little we offer him. I mean, think about it that mother who packed that lunch for her little boy that day had no idea that it would be used to feed as many as 20,000 people. She owned the ordinary that day, and Jesus did something amazing with it. People, we own the ordinary. Always remember. Learn to bring your little to Jesus and let him have it. He'll use it in a great way for his glory. So bring your little faith to him and watch him move that mountain. Bring your little testimony, watch him save souls. Bring your little praise and watch him get glory. Bring your little abilities and your little talents to him and watch him use you. He specializes in using the small things to amaze and to reveal his glory. So get the little you have into his hands today and see his ample generosity in action in your life and through your life. So we see that Jesus is not only concerned about the needs of his people, not only is he generous in providing those needs, much more generous than we could even imagine, but we also learn that when we receive from him, he brings complete satisfaction. Look at verse 9, or verse 16 rather. Then he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up into heaven, he blessed and broke them. He kept giving them to his disciples to set before the crowd. Everyone ate and was filled. They picked up 12 baskets of leftover pieces. You know, as teenagers, my boys would get up from a meal around the table and almost immediately they go to the fridge to find some leftovers, or maybe go to the pantry to pull out some bread and peanut butter. You know, growing teens can be filled, but they're rarely satisfied. Isn't that true? Those who've experienced that? Well, I think that we are that way too, as a people. Unless we find our satisfaction in Jesus, we will only discover that though we might be filled from what the world can provide us, we won't be truly satisfied. That new job is only exciting for a while. Troubles in marriage put a damper on the hope for a continual honeymoon. The smell of the new car fade. You see, church, satisfaction on this earth is temporary. But here we see that Jesus kept giving pieces of food, and they all ate, and they were all satisfied. Everyone had enough. They even had leftovers. No one went hungry. Don't miss the end of verse 17. The leftovers added up to 12 baskets full. Just a little nice nugget for you to think about. In the Bible, the number 12 is frequently associated with completeness. So, for example, the 12 sons of Jacob represented the 12 tribes of Israel, symbolizing the complete nation. Jesus chose 12 apostles to be his disciples. Revelation, the New Jerusalem is said to have 12 foundation stones, each bearing the name of one of the 12 tribes of Israel. This is the completeness of the kingdom. Now here, how many apostles are collecting leftover baskets? 12, thank you. 12 of them. How many baskets did they take up? 12. In God's economy, 12 baskets to feed 5,000 men, plus women and children, always adds up to more than 12. In Jesus' math, that means then that it's not just enough, it's completely enough. Jesus completely and abundantly satisfies our needs. And believe me, he knows your need. He knows what your need is in your school. He knows it in your job. He knows it as a dad or as a mom, as a friend, as a son or a daughter, as a boss, as a teacher. He knows what your need is this afternoon. And there will be a basket for you, a complete satisfaction tonight and tomorrow and the next day, above and beyond what we can even think, if you trust him to provide. Listen, church, see, now Now when I read that Jesus said, I am the bread of life, he who comes to me shall not hunger. We read that later on in John chapter 6. I know what that means. It means that Jesus has become in us an inexhaustible source of satisfying life that lasts forever and leads us to heaven, and on the way sets us free from these sinful illusions of other gratifications that we think will satisfy. He's the bread of life. He is complete, and he fills us more than we could imagine. So if that's the case, I think there must be a response from us. Here's the first point. Point to Jesus, not ourselves. The issue that the disciples faced was that they thought they needed to find a solution. Don't we often do that? My child walks away from Jesus, and I think that it'll be my words that'll convince him or her to come back to him. My friend has an emotional breakdown, and we think that the answer is to be there for them. They don't need more church or more Bible right now. I mean, what they really need is my shoulder to cry on and just time alone, away from others for a season. Or a family member chooses their way instead of God's way, and we're tempted to support their decision without bringing up God's perfect plan, because that come across as not supporting them. They don't need more scripture because that'll just push them further away from me, and maybe even further away from the church. Don't want that. But here's the thing. When we respond in any of these ways, we're trusting in ourselves to be the all-sufficient one. We act as though we have the answers. Now, it's not to say that we stop loving and supporting them. In fact, as Christians, we're called to love God and to love others. And love manifests itself in practical deeds of service. That means our call to love God and others is a call to serve in practical, cry on my shoulder, I love you in spite of, and here's a cup of water and a loaf of bread type of support and serving. That is what Jesus did. He healed their present ailments. He loved on them and then and there, and he even fed them all with real bread and real fish. It wasn't symbolic, it was real. So if we want to be like Jesus, we must learn to concern ourselves with others as he did. We need to regularly land the ship on the shore of each other's needs. But we don't serve thinking it's what we do that will satisfy. We serve knowing that Jesus is the one who's more than enough for our friends and our family. Serving knowing that Jesus is more than adequate, and we are not. Thankfully, the disciples, even in their inadequacy, did serve the crowd well by doing two things. They obeyed Jesus' instruction by finding the food, and then they brought the little that they had to Jesus, pointing to him as a provider instead of themselves. Sure, they made some mistakes along the way, but they ultimately landed at the feet and the hands of Jesus. So, church, serve Jesus and others. Allow your shoulder to be leaned on when needed. Help people in their need, but remember their greatest need is not you. Their greatest need is always Jesus. Jesus is more than adequate. We are not. Always point others to Jesus, not to ourselves. Secondly, give what we have, not what we don't have. Jesus didn't use all the bread in Bethsaida, which the disciples didn't have. He used the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes that they did have. Jesus doesn't ask you to give him what you don't have. He asks you to give him what you do have. Currently, today, right now, I just sit here in this room. Think about the boy who brought a small, tiny lunch with him that day. Now, again, he's not mentioned in Luke's narrative, but he's central to the account just the same, and he's introduced in John's account. No one in the crowd would have thought that this boy mattered. No one would have imagined him or that he was carrying in his little basket would be the provision of the moment. Nobody would have thought that at all. This was one little boy in the crowd with some sardines, probably dried out, and some worrying barley bread. But he had been chosen by God to be a significant piece of the Messiah's redemptive plan, not only for that day, but by the way, for the rest of human history. Do you realize that? No one knew that after this moment, Every man, woman, and child who trusted in Jesus and read the scriptures would know this boy, know exactly what was in his basket that day, and know how Jesus used him to make the point of points about his identity as God in the flesh, the miracle worker and provider of all our needs. The boy didn't know that, but he was available. Listen, you never know who Jesus will claim and use in ways that we can't predict or haven't even intended. That means that we are never lost in a crowd. Jesus knows us all. He knows where we are, what we have, and how we can be used. He is the divine author, writing our stories, your story, my story. And he's doing this each and every moment. He can do eternally amazing things with the little fragments of our lives that we're carrying around and that we tend to think aren't worth much. You know, as I was preparing this message and I had flipped over to John's Gospel and I was reading a little bit about this story, I was wondering if that, what if that little boy had said no to the stranger who came up to him and said, "Hey, Jesus wants your food"? What if he had said no? What if he had run as fast as he could into the crowd and disappeared? Well, thankfully he didn't. That's not how the story happened. The boy selflessly gave up his meal, and Jesus did with it what only the Son of God could do. By divine power, a crowd of thousands was satisfied by physical food with plenty of leftovers, and simultaneously pointed to the eternal source of spiritual food that satisfies the very soul. I mean, what an amazing story. Jesus did the impossible through an unremarkable kid in the middle of a very big crowd. This boy never received glory, only the Messiah did, by the way. He's not even mentioned outside, as I said, John's account. But what he carried in his basket had bigger and more lasting implications that he would have ever been able to grasp. Listen, church, we just never know what God will ask of us. We never know when he will ask it. We never know ahead of time what will happen when he does. We never know how Jesus will redeem our little bits and pieces and use them to give grace to the hungry soul. But what we do know is that without Jesus, 5 loaves and 2 fish were woefully inadequate. But with him, it was more than enough. 5 small loaves, 2 fish, a boy's lunch, not much to feed such a crowd. But in Jesus' math, he completely and abundantly satisfies our needs if we give our little to him. Listen, church, Jesus will shatter the pint-sized expectations of what we can do if we just learn to bring him what we've already been given. When we're willing to offer our lives sacrificially, relinquishing our hold on whatever God has given us in terms of time and money and talents, etc., God will use these ordinary things to create and accomplish extraordinary things. Never believe our resources are too little to serve God. God delights, in fact, in taking humble, seemingly insignificant people and using them for his glory. When we find that our ability to find a solution to the challenges of life is lacking, as we were asking this question earlier in this message, and we feel so inadequate, remember again that that is the correct assumption. We are inadequate. So keep pointing others to Jesus and bring your life to him in a spirit of obedience and of sacrifice, no matter how insignificant you think your gifts or talents are. And as you do, expect God to do far beyond what could ever be imagined.